I'm Dan Crone, also known as CCP Convict. I'm a community developer for EVE Online based in Reykjavik, Iceland.
So Dan, talk about for people who don't know, talk about what EVE Vegas is all about.
EVE Vegas is one of the major player gatherings that we have around the world every year. Vegas Fan Fest, which we've traditionally held in Iceland, and other events all kind of have a different flavor to them. For me, the thing I really love about EVE Vegas, and this is my fifth one now, first as a developer, but been to 4 as a player previously. Vegas has always felt to me as a much more community-focused event where people will gather together just more so for the sake of hanging out with their space friends, as opposed to, say, FanFest in Iceland, which is also fantastic, but because it's the home of CCP, it's very much, I felt, like an EVE Online-based player gathering, and people are there for the spaceships. So that's why I like Vegas so much. It's a lot more about the camaraderie to me and hugging it up.
It's not just Vegas either. You guys have traveled the world, Australia, UK, North America. Talk a little about how many events you have a year and what's like going to all these different places and seeing your different communities.
Well, this year has been exceptional in that regard because we've been holding what we call the EVE Invasion World Tour. And what we've done is we've taken the resources that for 2019, we've taken the resources that we'd normally put into EVE FanFest in Iceland and redistributed those to player events that were already underway and player run around the world. And we said, we'll be able to elevate your events, we'll be able to send more devs and just promote all of your local events a lot more to help them grow. And for example, the player gathering in Toronto earlier this year went from something like 120 attendees to like 400, just because CCP was like, we'll pump a lot more resources into it. I think there's been 8 events on the World Tour calendar, ranging from big events like this one here in Vegas, down to literally standing in a player's lounge room and doing presentations in Kemiönsaari in Finland. It's been pretty cool. I've only been on the ride since Finland. I did attend EVE Down Under as a player, but since starting at CCP in the 2 months, I've already got to go to Finland for that event, to Germany, then now EVE Vegas, and next month where our last stop is in London in the UK.
The EVE Online has this global community of players. What have you noticed about how in different regions of the world, how different communities play with each other in EVE Online?
I know you specifically asked me about differences, but it's the similarities which is the really stark thing. To give you an example, as we know, we've recently announced that we're doing our Korean localization. Up until now, Korean players have had to use the English client, which has obviously been a very challenge for them, and it has meant that the players that get involved in the game are really dedicated to it, to overcome that hurdle of the language barrier. In the lead up to the Korean localization, we started to reach out to the Korean community a lot more just to find out the complexion of things there, and it's really funny because we've spoken to some Korean players now, and we find out there's the two major groups that hate each other's guts, that are constantly fighting with each other, that have their own separate sort of like community platforms that they use to communicate with, and it's just like it's a complete all of these communities kind of mirror each other in that regard.
So can you talk about what it's like being here in EVE Vegas, seeing your community in person and getting feedback in person? Because it's a lot different talking to someone in person than on a forum or on like a chat.
Yeah, absolutely. When you're communicating just through forums, Reddit, Twitter, and things like that, often people like to remember the term vague booking, when people would express they were unhappy about something. But that's kind of where the conversation ends. You can't sort of dig down a little bit further and say, like, what did you mean by that? What's the actual cause of the issue that you're having? Which is why face-to-face interaction at these kinds of events is so valuable for us. Just this morning, I was grabbing some breakfast with CCP Dopamine and CCP Larrikin, and a player who we spoke to on the pub crawl came walking past our table and said, "Hey, what's up?" And we're like, "Oh, hi, man." He said, "I'm just looking for my corp mates," and it's like, do you want to just sit down and have breakfast with us? And in the course of the conversation, we sat down at breakfast with this one guy for about an hour. I think CCP Larrikin must have pulled out his phone like 4 or 5 separate times just to take notes. He was talking about lag when you open up the industry window in a station, if you have thousands of blueprints. And he's like, you click on that thing and I have to sit there for a minute to pull up. And Larrikin's like, okay, yeah. And he started messaging CCP Kako in Iceland to say, hey, here's an issue we should really take a look at. And that sort of immediacy of the feedback from the player and being able to just immediately channel that is absolutely gold, from our standpoint.
You, as a community developer, there's a lot of it's a worldwide game. EVE Online is a worldwide game played by multiple communities. Are there any challenges when dealing with communities that are in North America and Asia, Russia, Europe, anything like that?
The most obvious challenge to organising those communities is obviously language barrier. We do have, for example, for the Russian community, we do have some some Russian-speaking staff at CCP who kind of handle the Russian affairs, and other places, however, throughout Europe, they tend to, English is easy enough to communicate with them in that way. The Korean community, for example, is one that, because they haven't even had a localized client and any sort of official Korean support for things like help tickets and stuff like that, it means that whole community's kind of been under a little bit of a shroud from our standpoint when but we've just sort of, with the Korean localization coming up, we finally started to pierce through that now and reach out to that community, because we really want to see that grow, because it's going to be fantastic, not just for the additional players to the game, but those players, the new players that the Korean localization will hopefully bring in, are going to be occupying a time zone for EVE players, which is traditionally very quiet compared to North American time zone and the European time zone, because all you've got in that slice of the world is you've got Australia, New Zealand, a bunch of players in Japan, and sort of like a scattering throughout Southeast Asia. So if all of a sudden another 2,000, 5,000, 10,000, who knows, Korean players start logging and playing EVE, that's really going to kick off activity in that entire wedge, which will have a knock-on effect into the time zones as New Eden moves through them every day.
So what's next for EVE Online? What can players look forward to?
Well, towards the end of November, we're going to be releasing Invasion Chapter 2, which is our next big expansion that adds more Triglavian content to the game. There'll be a new Triglavian Dreadnought that players will be able to get their hands on and fly around. And players can also look forward to a series of rapid-fire changes that are coming from a new team within CCP that is being headed up by CCP Rise and CCP Paradox. We've already seen the first iteration of that recently with the warp speed changes. They've increased the warp speed slightly to cruisers, battle cruisers, and battleships, and players reacted to that overwhelmingly positively. And over the next 3 months leading up to Christmas, every 2 weeks, that team will be having some kind of a new release that will address an array of issues that players have been have been sore points to them for some time. And then as we go into 2020, we're going to move to a new release cadence where every quarter we will be dropping content to players, and we'll also be giving them an idea at that time what the next quarter has in store for them, but without giving away too much.